Hi, it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and I am preparing for my son's Dory/Nemo themed birthday party. So I won't say that these look exactly like Dory, it's more just like my take on a blue tang with a few little Dory details on there. I used a cookie cutter for these cookies, and if I wanted to make it look actually like Dory, I think I would hand cut it because she has a lot of space between her eyes and her mouth area, which makes her look very much like the character rather than just a generic blue tang fish. So throughout this whole tutorial, I just use pipe and flood consistency. And if you don't know what that is, it basically means that you're able to flood with it, you're able to pipe some details with it, but you're never going to get such stiff details that you would be able to, say, pipe a flower with it. My royal icing recipe is super straightforward. It's 1 cup of icing sugar and 1 tablespoon of meringue powder, and then as much water as needed. And the reason that I never really give the exact amount of water is because everybody's climate acts differently to this royal icing recipe. So you just want to test it out yourself to see what you need to add in order to get the consistency you want. So I generally like to make sure that my base is ready to go before I pop these in the oven to dehydrate. And I will talk about that more in just a minute. So what I'm doing here is, again, because I'm using pipe and flood consistency, I can't just all fill this in together at once. If I do that, then everything's going to meld together and it's not going to really have the shape of the seashell that I want. These seashells are going to be fairly simplistic. There's not going to be too much added to them. So I'm really relying on the puffiness of this icing and the shape to kind of sell the idea of the seashell. So notice I'm just skipping one kind of section so that I create this depth, and we're going to let that completely dry. Now, when I first started out making cookies, I would let things dry overnight before starting the next layer. But who has the time for that? I know I certainly don't. So now I never have issues of cookies not being dry because I just use my oven as kind of like a dehydrator. You can also use a dehydrator, and I do have a dehydrator, but I find that I like to use my oven more because it can fit more things in it at once. There's actually a lot more benefits to dehydrating your cookies, or your icing I should say, because you're really not affecting the cookie base at all, but there's so many more benefits than simply drying it quickly. You're actually doing a lot more than that. So if you want to hear more, you can check out this video in the right hand corner where I explain it a little bit more in depth. So now I'm working on my starfish, and all of my starfish are going to be the same color. Because I'm making such a small amount, there's really not too many kids attending this birthday party, so I really want to make sure that I'm not mixing up too many colors. Again, I don't like to use a whole lot of piping bags, so this already is using a lot of piping bags for me. I should also mention that I am using couplers with a number 2 tip on there, but I prefer tipless piping bags. I've just run out of them. Now I'm using a wet on wet technique. You can honestly do this for the whole part of your starfish, but I'm going to add some 3D little dots as well. The key to wet on wet technique is just making sure that both of your icing consistencies are the exact same. Now what I'm doing is I'm filling in all those gaps on my seashells. Remember what we talked about earlier with making sure that your layers are nice and dry. If these weren't nice and dry, we would get them all flooding together. Now, when you first laid down the first portion of the seashells, it really wasn't that big of a deal how neat and tidy it was. This part, however, does matter because there's going to be nothing else that's covering this up. Now, something that I've learned with the technique of doing this is if your frosting is too thin, you're going to start to get little craters and bubbles in there. So you do want to make sure that it's still pretty viscous when you put this down. Now we're going to go and fill in the rest of the Dory, or the blue tang, whatever you want to call it, and we're just going to fill in with this blue frosting. Now I do make a little bit of a mistake here. Now my original thinking was that I would kind of leave it not totally mixed. I would have kind of the darker blue and the lighter blue kind of marbling together. I thought it would create this really cool effect. It looks okay to me, but honestly I think most of you might prefer to just have it all mixed in together. Totally your choice. If I could go back, I'd probably change that and make sure that everything was fully mixed, but it still looks cute in the end. Now, I used to do this by spooning it on and then moving things around with a toothpick or with a cookie pick, but I've stopped doing that, and I really stopped doing that because I noticed when I did that, I got a lot of air bubbles. I find when I pipe it on, I don't seem to get any air bubbles at all. And now I'm just going to go ahead and add on these little details here, just creating little dots. I'm squeezing my piping bag, and then once I want the dot to end, I stop squeezing and I lift off. And I'm lifting off fairly up and down, not trying to angle this. Now, one thing I do want to note is that I did this the next day instead of doing it on the same day. What you'll notice is with my icing, it's a little bit gooier, I want to say. It kind of pulls up instead of stops. And this happens with your frosting when it sits. Now, for that particular job, it's not a big deal. However, if you are going to be doing a lot of icing and lots of different techniques, I highly recommend that you re-whip that royal icing. And I know that sounds like a bit of a pain. I remember when I was making a lot of cookies, I was always grateful to have the bag ready to go the next day. But in reality, I would have to re-whip it, or else I would get really kind of loose consistencies, and it just wouldn't act the same way as when it was freshly whipped. Now what I did there was I'm just using some edible airbrush. I always paint with edible airbrush. There's lots of other mediums. I just find that I always have this on hand. So instead of making a whole bunch of new yellow just for 4 cookies, I decided to just brush on that edible airbrush. And then here I'm brushing on that purple color that Dory has. Although I think when she's adult Dory, it looks a little bit duller in color. Maybe it's slightly different. But either way, I know that she does have a purplish color on her eye. And then we're going to go in and we're going to place some black edible marker all the way around just to give it that little bit of extra pop. This is always the most satisfying part for me, adding this little black portion. And of course, we need to add in that little glint of white in her eye. And I'm doing that with an edible pearl, but you could do that with royal icing as well. Then I'm going in with some of that blue icing that we had earlier, and I'm just kind of creating that eye socket portion and adding on, I think these are supposed to be kind of like little freckles that she has. And then going in with that black edible pen again and putting in those details of her fins. Again, you could have done wet on wet technique for this. You could also use a thickened up royal icing and pipe on these black lines. Whatever you see fit, then go ahead and do it. And I just wanted to make her look a little bit extra happy. So I decided to give her a little eyebrow. And here are our cookies, and I'm actually going to be utilizing these cookies as cookie favors for my son's party. I'm going to have a big video talking all about how I do that. Now let's get into the pricing of these cookies. It's pretty straightforward for these cookies. They range in price from $3.50 to $5 Canadian each. The lower end would obviously be those seashells, and the higher end would be our little blue tang. Please keep in mind that my pricing may differ from yours, so it's best to look at all of my pricing videos so you can see the differentiation between the pricing. And here is our subscriber submission for the day. Again, we're featuring another letter cake. I absolutely love the details on this one. Go and follow her on Instagram. Drop her a like, drop her a comment. This one is absolutely fabulous. And if you want to be the next featured subscriber on my channel for a shout out, please follow me on Instagram at SDBakeShop and be sure to tag me in whatever photo you would like me to share on my next video. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!